When you have someone who believes in you, life just becomes unstoppable. And I think that's what every grandparent wants their grandchild to have, that strong connection, that I believe in this child and I want to see them grow and blossom.
Has a family member ever looked at your autistic child and just not gotten it? Maybe they thought the meltdowns were a discipline problem. Maybe they stopped coming around after the diagnosis. Maybe they said something that broke your heart, and you've been carrying that ever since. The grandparent relationship is one of the most complicated, most emotional, and most under-talked about dynamics in autism families. And today we're going to talk through some of the pain you might have experienced. I'm Tonya and this is the Water Prairie Chronicles, a podcast where we walk alongside parents of children with disabilities, bringing you honest conversations and practical guidance to help your family move forward with confidence. My guest today is Dr. Theresa Lyons, a Yale-trained scientist, an autism educator, and someone who brings a perspective I've never had on this podcast before. Dr. Lyons is the founder of Navigating Autism. She has worked with families in more than 21 countries, and she is also a mother to an autistic child. She knows this topic from the inside out, and today she's sharing it with us. We're talking about how to help grandparents understand your autistic child, how to bridge the gap without losing the relationship, and what it means for a child when a grandparent truly shows up for them. Dr. Lyons, welcome to Water Prairie.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
In the parenting communities right now, parents share two very different experiences. Grandparents who disappear or pull back after a diagnosis, and grandparents who show up through every meltdown and every milestone. From what you're seeing with working with families across, we said more than 21 countries, what's the defining factor that you think separates a grandparent who struggles to connect from one who becomes a true ally for their family?
A lot has to do with the already established communication between the grandparent and the adult child. So if it is strained, autism is just going to put more strain on that. So it's really important to be able to have conversations and to communicate from generation to generation. That's really how you can have grandparents provide meaningful support to the family.
Now, I was an older parent when I had my children, which means my parents were older by the time my kids came. And I can remember my daughter's diagnosis. Now my daughter's visually impaired, and she has low vision, so she's not blind in the traditional sense that a lot of people may imagine a blind child would be acting. And we would go to my mom and dad's house, and she would run through their house and not bump into anything. And I can remember my mom saying, "She can see just fine." She's, like she didn't get it that seeing has different levels. And for Emily, what she could see was a distorted version of what we saw, but because she's nearsighted, it would, like, the objects would be larger than they really were, so she could easily navigate around the blurred edge of what she saw. And so we found that a lot of it was a lack of education, not understanding what that diagnosis meant for my daughter. Do you think that plays a role in this as well, with grandparents who don't understand, or because they came through a generation that would hide a diagnosis rather than disclosing that to their neighbors or to their friends?
So, research in 2023 looked at grandparents who were playing the grandparenting role, not stepping in as a parent. And they found that um, caregiver intervention and training was really beneficial for these grandparents. And I will say, in general, for parenting, research also shows that learning about autism and really getting your hands into different interventions and really understanding the behavioral aspect makes a huge difference for parents and kids with autism. So the same is true for grandparents. You can't expect a grandparent to know what to do if the research shows we can't even expect parents
Right.
to automatically know how to do this, right?
Right.
So we we definitely need to give grandparents some grace as to, the majority of them are not going to know what to do. They're not going to know how to handle meltdowns. Meltdowns can be very traumatic for everyone. So for the child that is having it, and for anyone around that is even watching it. Grandparents sometimes say that the trauma is seeing their grandchild behave like that, seeing their adult child not really be able to help, and it's traumatic as a grandparent to just have to stand there and watch and feel helpless and then not even know where to turn to. So there's definitely a lot of trauma that can be experienced. So the more education and the more really hands-on intervention training that a grandparent can get really helps with understanding the situation and then supporting your adult child much easier.
Yeah, and I can see that because I I know from the parenting side of things, when our children are young, we go into it thinking, you know, of course everyone thinks I'm going to have the perfect child. So
Yes.
why
Like, I
would
know
I
how to
not?
parent.
You know?
There's not gonna be any
That's
problems until
right.
they're, like, teenagers,
I'm the
and then
perfect
I'll
parent.
be
I
able
know
to
it
help.
all. It's
I can figure it out,
right.
yeah. Like, parenting, come on, I watched my parents do it, it was easy,
Yeah.
except when I didn't like what they did, and I'm just not gonna do
I'm not going to
that,
do that.
so I know what
Exactly.
to do.
And I don't know about you, but when my kids would have those meltdowns, it must be a discipline issue, you know. So I have to lay the line out that this is what you know, we don't do this. We went through parenting programs to learn how to parent the strong-willed child. We went through that. And we kind of came on it the best way to help our children through stumbling a lot along the way. And so helping a grandparent understand that journey is that next level, like you're saying, because if we're struggling, then
I don't think anyone naturally knows how to handle an autism meltdown. Parent, grandparent. I just don't think that's in our like DNA to really be able to understand that, and understand when the nervous system just gets overwhelmed and overstimulated, uh, and even tuning into someone's nervous system like that, right? As a parent, we start to tune into, okay, when are their triggers? Oh, we're starting to notice their nervous system. These are all things that most parents don't ever develop that skill of, okay, I'm really tuned into how overwhelmed my child is. So there's a lot about autism and meltdowns, and just so much that when you get educated on it, it makes sense and you can see things and you're like, okay. But without that education piece, I think it's really, really difficult.
how do you recommend that parents and grandparents start that education process?
So a lot of times it depends on what's going on locally. Um, uh, there are some grandparents that prefer to learn in person, some parents as well. So it's really knowing that about yourself. Do I need something in person? Do I need something virtually? You have a lot more options when you're open to learning from things virtually. But there are great coaches out there. Different large hospital systems run a lot of these education programs, and that's where you can start. It You're likely not going to get all the information you need in one sitting and from one place because that has a certain perspective. So you've just got to start somewhere. So start where you feel comfortable learning, and then just know that you're going to want to keep learning for sure.
Our grandparents may have a lot of confusion because they didn't grow up with these terms that we're talking about a lot easier now, like neurodiverse, neurotypical. Those are words that our grandparent group would not have heard until recent years because no one was using those words until more recent years.
That's very recent. Neurodivergent and neurotypical is within probably 4 years or so. Because even when my daughter was diagnosed with autism, um, neurodiverse and neurotypical was not anything that was discussed back then. And it's only been 13 years,
Right,
so it's
right.
not
And
that long,
and
really.
that's part of of more than just autism too. And so you have this whole,
Yeah,
yeah.
neurodiverse
So
autism,
it can get an
ADHD,
intermixed with this too.
definitely.
With all of this new stuff coming in, with watching their children struggling, because once a parent, we're always a parent. So if our children are struggling, we're struggling too. There's some grief that comes with that. There may be some denial that's coming with not accepting the diagnosis that's there. How can we help these grandparents process the grief and the confusion that they might be feeling?
Everyone processes things a little differently, but support and community and having other grandparents who also have kids with autism definitely is helpful, so that you can talk through these things. In 2017, there was a large study done of almost 2,000 grandparents, and it identified themes of grandparents wanting to have that connection with an autistic child and just struggling, how do I connect with my grandchild with autism? So it's important for grandparents to know that they're not the only one who struggles with that, right? So understanding different statistics like this is really important, because it can feel very hard. It can be like, this is not the grandparenting experience I want, right? Maybe you walk in the house and the child, runs away, or the child goes and sits in the corner, and every time you try and go towards them, here, let's read a book, let's do this, and the child then starts getting even more and more upset. So there's certain, like, nobody ever thinks that that's going to be their grandparenting experience. So then it becomes this shock of what am I doing wrong? What is going on? So again, it's that education piece is really, really important, so that grandparents don't take it so personally. And then they can learn, how do I have conversations with my adult child about how to interact with my grandchild? Because that might be something that they really, really want. Um, and it's important to have these conversations, but these are not easy conversations to have, and I don't think anyone is very good at them without a little planning and maybe practicing a little, role playing in their head, that kind of thing. So I think it's really important for grandparents to understand that it's natural and it's okay to feel some grief of, this isn't what I was expecting, and I still want to connect with my grandchild. And there's maybe a lot of things that that grandparent wants to teach that child, right? And all of that needs to be taken into account. So the need for information for grandparents is definitely high, so that they get the education and understanding about what autism is, and so then they could create more beneficial interactions.
So let's move to the parents listening, because more than likely that's who's hearing us, and they're going to be passing this on to the grandparents. So for those parents that are listening right now who are actively navigating a painful divide, maybe the grandparents have minimized the diagnosis, they've refused to follow sensory accommodations at their home, or they simply don't believe this is a real diagnosis. What are the first steps that this parent can take to start building that bridge without hurting the relationship? Because walking away from your parents is not the answer, but there's ways that we can help bring them in gently. Do you have any recommendations for those parents?
Well, so I'm going to back it up just a little bit, because one thing I've noticed is sometimes where the tension comes from is before the diagnosis. So there are times when grandparents point things out about grandkids, and the adult children might not want to hear it. And this is something grandparents struggle with, in the sense of, do I mention that I have some concerns about speech or behavior or things like that? So sometimes this situation is actually the root, right? You have all these emotions that stem from maybe a grandparent saying something. And there is research showing that grandparents, both the grandmother and the grandfather, do notice things earlier, And when they discuss those concerns, an autism diagnosis is made earlier. But again, these are difficult conversations to have, right? So a grandmother that is frequently involved with their grandchild, the autism diagnosis is made 5 months sooner, and for a grandfather, it's 4 months sooner. So these grandparents have big impact, but those kind of conversations you can imagine are not easy, and you could imagine how many do not go well.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask how can a grandparent start that conversation and be heard, because you don't want to come across as judgmental, or and I can see the parent now feeling like they're being told they're doing something wrong.
Exact right, and then that triggers that parent
Right.
into the whole
So now
parent-child
the
relationship,
relationship's
and then
gone, you know.
yes, 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 yes. So a lot of times, um, I mean, there's so many different ways to handle this. Um, I have found, and I have helped families kind of dig themselves out of that hole of anger and everything, to sometimes have these kinds of conversations in email, and where
Hmm.
people can really think about their thoughts. We now have all types of AI, and we could plug it into AI and be like, make sure I'm not offending anyone. Does this sound rude? Like we can make sure we at least start the conversation in the way that we want. So I was working with a mom who, the in-laws had mentioned a few things, and the mom just really got upset because this was her first time being a mom, and she really wanted to do a good job, and it felt it wasn't, but it felt to her like she was failing, and then her in-laws were thinking she's a bad mom, and so it cascaded down in a very negative way, and the mother-in-law actually stopped the conversation and was like, this is not what we want to happen, right? Both sides can see like, oh, these words are just getting in the way of everything. So for that family, what, because then the next time they were visiting, the grandfather couldn't help himself and he said an observation again, and then the mom got really upset and doesn't want to visit, and then the father's in this awkward position. So what was done was, the grandfather wrote an email, and it was in response to the mom. So the mom was the one who was getting really upset, but she honestly had certain concerns of her own, and that's why her emotion was getting, she had that concern herself. So it was just her being like, okay, I want to know what you see. And email was the only way she could handle it, and she couldn't read the email reply for a while, and the mother-in-law made sure the grandfather-in-law was, his words were good, right? So like everybody knew this is an emotionally charged situation, but the thing is, everybody had love for the grandchild, and that's the important thing to remember. So words are going to come out the wrong way. They're going to You're going to say things probably that you don't think are harmful or insulting, but yeah, on the other side, it is. So it's just important for everyone to say, all right, we do not mean this in any negative way whatsoever. So sometimes you have to get out in front. So a grandfather could or grandmother could say, listen, parenting is very different nowadays, and you are dealing with things that we did not have to deal with at all. And I understand how hard it is to be working and to have kids and relationships and all of this. So we only ever want to make your life easier. And you could just say, I just want you to remember that piece throughout all of this. Just remember that. Right? And it seems kind of silly. Why do I have to say that? Like, that's my child. I've known them all their lives. They know I love them. But you're dealing with such an emotional situation that sometimes it's better to just, put that out there so that you can always circle back to that. Because most grandparents love their grandchildren, most parents love their children, most parents want their grandparents involved in everything. So it's really just, how do we make sure that the communication piece in all of this doesn't trigger anyone, and how do we build that multi-generational support and interaction? It really takes conscious effort. It doesn't, for most people, it doesn't just kind of flow. For most people it can become very burdensome and stressful, and nobody wants that. So it really just takes a lot of thought, I would say.
When listeners, to bring back the story of my daughter and my mom questioning, you know, why we were making such a big deal about her not being able to see, my mom came around and started learning more, and would take books that she would buy for her and take a black pen outline and outline the pictures. Once she understood what was needed, then she was part of the solution and a support for me, and to this day is her strongest advocate for anything. so it is worth the investment of time to help both
Yeah.
generations understand. And grandparents, if you lead with love, that's what this is
Yeah,
all about. You do
it
love your
is.
child, but our words can be so harsh at times that we don't mean them to be, but they can come.
And we don't. Yep.
And when
Nope.
your daughter or your son are on that raw emotion of dealing with this toddler or this preschooler who is just having meltdowns and they don't know why yet, and they're living in trauma all the time. It's hard to receive anything that's not positive at that point, and that suggestion, yeah.
Doesn't, because it, like you're saying, the parent, you've got to put yourself in the perspective of the adult child, the parent, and they might not be sleeping, right? Their child might not be sleeping. There might be battles with eating and with getting dressed and with school. School might call every day, twice a day, three times a day. You might not be able to really focus on work, and then maybe you're feeling stressed, like, oh, I don't want to get fired. So the adult child is in such a different state, that and the adult child might be presenting like, yeah, I got this, everything is good, right? But
Oh, they're
underneath they're like, oh my gosh, right? So
yeah.
this is where, like, leading with compassion, even if it seems like it's unnecessary, but also not being like condescending, but that genuine
Yeah.
compassion, is really the place to start.
I want to pose this question because I think it's one that if we can finish with this thought, it's going to help everyone listening. What do you believe an autistic child truly gains when they have a grandparent who deeply gets them? And what's at risk when they don't?
Oh, when you have someone who believes in you, life just becomes unstoppable. And I think that's what every grandparent wants their grandchild to have, like that strong connection, that I believe in this child and I want to see them grow and blossom, and always to have a safe space. I mean, if you could imagine asking a child, when do you feel safe? When I see grandpa, when grandma bakes me cookies, right? That's what life is all about. So having that unconditional support, that safe space, just means everything to a grandchild.
When and I like the term safe space because that defines it so well. Um, it's not safe from being shot at. It's an emotionally safe space, and it's so important that our kids find that place. But yeah, what grandparent doesn't want to be the one who is that for them? you know?
Exactly. I mean, that is what grandparenting is. You're there for just so that that grandchild feels love, like, and feels it, not just knows, right? With the parent and child, many times we always feel like we know our parent loves us, like we know it. We might not say I feel love, or like my mom or my dad is my safe space, but a grandparent could have that. And just education, understanding what autism is, and taking the time to have those conversations with the adult child, it really can make a huge difference in everyone's lives.
As a scientist, as a mother, as someone who's walked this path herself, I appreciate you being here today. This conversation is going to mean something to a lot of our families, and I'm sure that our listeners are going to want to connect with you. Where can they find you?
Sure, you can find me at navigatingautism.com. And I do spell autism differently. I spell it AWETISM. And you can also find me on YouTube. I've had a channel for over 10 years. So you pretty much any research you do on YouTube about autism, you're going to run into a video of mine or two. So certainly check me out there and leave comments. I write back to the comments. So that's definitely a place to get started.
So we'll put those links in the show notes, and your other social media as well, because you're on Instagram and Facebook and all too, right? So here are 3 things that I want you to carry from today. First, grandparents are on their own journey too. They didn't grow up in a world that understood neurodiversity, and their confusion or resistance isn't always rejection. It's often fear or grief or simply not knowing what to do. That doesn't make hurtful words okay, but understanding the why gives you somewhere to start. Second, you're not responsible for educating everyone in your family by yourself. Dr. Lyons gave us a real practical language for beginning the bridge building conversation. Use it, start small, one conversation at a time. And third, the stakes for your autistic child are real. A grandparent who truly gets them is not a nice to have. It's a relationship that can shape who they are and who they believe they are. That's worth the hard conversation. If you want to go deeper with Dr. Lyons' work, make sure that you check out the show notes for her links. We'll put that in the description for you. And if today's conversation has you thinking about your child's school supports, I'm here for you. Reach out anytime. Share this episode with a grandparent who needs to hear it or a parent who needs to hear it. And subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. And take good care of yourself and your family, and I'll see you next time.